Know that one cannot truly appreciate the reality of prophecy except the one who experiences the spiritual wayfaring of the people of God and the protected friends of God, exalted be He, through the discipline and purification of the self, as well as the cleansing and the cultivation of the heart. You see, because many of us, Islam is merely this. It's just movements we make. You see, it's similar, but not the same as yoga, or one of those other things, that we make physical movements, but the mind has not been what? Cleansed. I.e., were we to be asked about the nature of religion intellectually, the nature of this great deed intellectually, we would develop a very, very cute stutter, because we don't have much to say about religion. We don't have much. And if we were to speak, it would, whatever, come out all wrong. It wouldn't be religious talk. It'd be make-up, one's own opinions, not something we took from the Senate, the great transmission. That's problematic. It's telling us where is the level of engagement at. The level of engagement, if it's not at the level of the mind, it's at the level of the limbs. And if it's at the level of the mind, then one can move beyond, what is that? The level of the soul, which is where religion is really at. That's where the companions and the great imams were at. That they related or engaged Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, experienced Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the level of the soul. So then what about the level of the heart, the level of the mind, and the level of the limbs? That's the nature of the great companions, and that can only come about through radical discipline upon the way of the Sharia. Radical discipline. I mean, we're you to look at the companions, and we should. You see, we should, like we mentioned before, Abdullah ibn Uthman. It's usually like a good test. Abdullah ibn Uthman. Who's heard of Abdullah ibn Uthman? Who can tell me about someone called Abdullah ibn Uthman? Abdullah ibn Uthman. We just need one hand. One hand. Abdullah ibn Uthman, sisters. Abdullah ibn Uthman. Okay? Now this doesn't mean there's anything wrong, but it's just a litmus test to know where we are in relation to the biographies. Abdullah ibn Uthman is the most famous companion. His name's Abu Bakr. We mentioned him today. His name is Abdullah ibn Uthman. The fact that we don't know Abdullah ibn Uthman means we haven't read the biography of the Imam himself. We haven't hit the books, we haven't sat with the teachers to know who that great Imam, who we more commonly call Abu Bakr, was. But that was the name his father and mother gave him. His name is Abdullah, and his father's name is Uthman ibn Uthman Abu Quhafa. Okay, so the point being is that we know this religion through them great men. And when we speak about religion, we've got to understand who the great men and who the great women were. So when we look at Abdullah ibn Uthman as an example, Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he's from those who the great Imam of spirituality, the Tabi'i, the great Imam whose father and mother were servants of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a man who was raised in the very house of prophecy. He said, as a young boy, I used to jump from the roofs of the wives of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from house to house. That's his rawdah. Who is that? Anyone know? Hassan al-Basri, the great Imam Hassan al-Basri. Don't be fooled by the name al-Basri, because he later moves to Basra, but he's born and raised inside the Medina al-Munawwara, in the very house of prophecy, Hassan al-Basri. And he's the one who says, Ra'aytu unasan, I saw the people, law ra'aytahum. Were you to see them, lahasibatuhum majani. You would consider them to be mad people, madmen. The type of things they used to do. Like Abu Bakr, Abdullah ibn Uthman, Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, for 12 years would place rocks in his mouth, just to discipline his tongue. 12 years. You see, that's the Imam, the person we can say Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu. You see, that's the Imam that when the Shia raised their ugly tongue against what? Against the Sunnah, the Imams of the Sunnah, like Abu Bakr, how could he speak about Abu Bakr? See, why don't we speak about Abu Bakr? What do we know about the Imam himself radiallahu ta'ala anhu? And were you to go through any of these companions, you would find them to be radical. And radical, I don't mean radical in terms of the way the modern media speaks, but maybe they would be as well. I'm pretty sure if Abu Bakr was here, he'd be considered one of them radicals that maybe the media would speak about. But they were radical by any definition of the term. Radical in terms of the food that they approached. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala would eat once, what we would call a snack, every 3 days. Every 3 days. The Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum would go to the toilet once every 3 days. Can you imagine that? That their normative pattern to go relieve themselves once every 3 days, because not much goes in. Radical in terms of food, radiallahu ta'ala anhum. Radical in terms of worship. People would spend the entire night in prayer. Radical in terms of dhikr. Abdullah ibn Umar saying to Usama ibn Zayd, "Udhkur Allah hadith Ahmed hatta yaqul an-nas annaka majnoon." That they would, that's all, you just see their tongues moving like buzzing bees in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People who would pray with one verse, يعني لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وإن تبدوا ما في أنفسكم وتخفوه يحاسبكم به الله. That one verse is Surah Al-Baqarah, ويغفر لمن يشاء ويعذب من يشاء والله على كل شيء قدير. That verse in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, Abdullah ibn Umar would spend the entire night with that verse, crying to Allah Ta'ala. Look at Umar ibn Khattab. If you saw a man who had lines etched in his face due to crying, what would you think about that man? That's the great Umar ibn Khattab, lines etched to his face. What would we think about a man who comes to the mosque with what? Patches upon his clothes. Patches, 12 patches, some of them made out of what? Out of animal skin. What would you think about him? ذاك Umar ibn Khattab. That was Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. One garment patched radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Look at the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. What would we think about a man who mends his own sandals? And when he's given a new pair, just a new strap, and he's in prayer, and he says, "It distracted me in prayer." Get rid of it. Get rid of it, yani. That's the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Give me the old strap, I'll mend it, I'll fix it. Yani, khalas, doesn't distract me from my purpose in life. You could go through all of the Sahaba. We mentioned saying Ali bin Abi Talib, sleeping upon the ground, sleeping. You see, we'd be saying, you're overdoing it, yani. The deen doesn't need you to go that far. You see, just everything has a right. Even the dunya, ya akhi, has a right over you. I mean, how do we try and explain that away? But when you look at the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, radical, because it's that radical renunciation and this radical turning towards the Sharia to Allah. Just the Safina to Nuh, as Imam Malik says, the ark, he says, "Men raqibaha naja," the one who rides upon it is saved, and the one who doesn't, ghariq, he says, is drowned. Imam Malik radiallahu ta'ala an says about the Sharia. So when they ride upon that great ark, who's the one who's saved? Who's the one who's on the ship unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ship of salvation? You see, so when we look at the books, and we get, as an example, go and buy a red book, Discipline in the Soul of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, translated by the Imam Shaykh Abdul Hakim Murad. Go and buy the book, the red book, it's called Discipline in the Soul, Riyadat al-Nafs wa Kasrat al-Shahwatain, Breaking the Two Desires. Read it from beginning to end, and then just tell me at the end of it what you think about it. Now, he's trying to tell you about how the early people were, how they disciplined themselves, because that radical discipline is necessary for the experience of the real. And that's what the Prophet undergoes in them first 2 formative years inside of what? Hira. Radical. I mean, he's left his family behind. Left them behind. He only returns for a day or so just to restock and go back to the hills. That's for 2 years. Prophecy comes. He engages. Sees Khadija. That's his visit there of Khadija. Then he hits the hills once again. Doesn't stay in the house with Khadija or Waraqa. Hits the hills for another 5 years. He's in the mountains, worshipping in the mountains alongside his companions. Radiallahu ta'ala anhum. Okay? The miraculous experiences of the protected friends are the beginning stages of prophecy. What they say is Nihayatul Wilaya, Bidayatul Risala. That the beginning of Bidayatul Nubuwah, they say, that the end of sainthood is the beginning of prophecy, and the end of prophecy is the beginning of messengership, and messengership has no end, okay? No end to its degrees, okay? So the miraculous experiences of the protected friends are the beginning stages of prophecy. You see, Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani has 3 volumes about their miraculous experiences. You see amongst the Sahaba, mentioned the likes of Safina, okay, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. You can mention the likes of Sayyidina Sa'ad Nabi Waqqas and Abu Hurairah. When they reach a great river, before the great battle of Qadisiyah, the army of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala an, they don't know rivers, they don't know water, they don't really know them. Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab said, I would have beat anybody who rid the ocean. They're not people of the water. So to get to it, what can we do here? You see, it's beyond. What shall we do here? They said, move, just let's move, khalas. Let's go into the water. So Abu Hurairah relates the hadith. Abu Hurairah said that we with the army, the entire army with all that it was carrying, hit the water, and we begin to what? Ride over water. And that's what they say, that Jesus alayhi salam walked upon water. But the companions, they rode upon water with horses and provision. And Abu Hurairah said the hooves of the horses never got wet. And we were speaking to each other as we were riding across. That's how natural it was, Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu said. Or you can look at the likes of Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab. We hear about the great floods that we're experiencing. And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala, and Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As in Egypt, he says that the Nile floods. And every time it floods and kills many a person and destroys the crops, besides in the fertile land, besides the Nile, that the Egyptians, the Copts, take it upon themselves, pagan act, to take quote unquote a virgin girl and throw it inside of the Nile in order to appease the Nile. See, that's the hukm jahiliyyah. So he writes to Amr al-As, writes to Umar ibn Khattab and says, what do we do here? What? Umar la yufakkir? What do you think we should do here? Umar, ana khalq, I'm creation of Allah Ta'ala. The Nile is a creation of Allah Ta'ala. Let me just write it a letter. That's a madman, isn't it? And he just writes a letter. Bismillah, Umar ibn Khattab, Khalifatul Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he says to the Nile that besides you are the ibad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you rise out of your own volition, then do whatever you want. But if you are beneath the commandment of God, then you better come down, be humble in front of the servants of God. And he sends it to Amr ibn al-As, and Amr gets the letter, and he says, when you get the letter, throw it in the Nile. I mean, what would you do? What do you mean, throw it in the Nile? Yeah, and many people just rip it up to shreds and put it back in the bin and think of another way to deal with the problem. Maybe everyone move away from the banks of the Nile. Amr ibn al-As, that one, what does he do? He takes it, throws it into the Nile, the letter of Umar ibn Khattab, and the Nile comes down. Yeah, Amr's another one of them madmen, Amr ibn al-As himself, when he gets to Cairo, and they're on the banks, they're on the doors of old Cairo, used to be called Fustat. Fustat means the citadel, a fortress. That's what it used to be called. That's why in modern Cairo, there's the old part which is still to this day called Fustat. That was the old Cairo. They couldn't penetrate with the armies of Amr ibn al-As in the time of Umar ibn Khattab. They couldn't break the city, the capital of Egypt. Okay? So he said, what shall we do? Amr ibn al-As says, I've got an idea. He said, what is that? He said, you see the boulders we put the rocks on? We fire at the walls to break. That's not working, is it? They built a really good fortress. The only way we put me on it, and just fire me over the wall. You fire me over the wall, and then I'll land, and I'll get there, open the door, we'll get in. That's it. That's my plan. They're like, hey, Amr, and what's all that about? And he says, the only way we're going to get in. He says, if that's the only way, let one of us go. He says, no. They say, why? He says, because the Prophet ﷺ told me that I would not die till I conquered Egypt. That's what he said. That's what he says, that I would not die till I've conquered Egypt. If any of you have got that guarantee that you can live beyond this, then khalas. If you don't have it, then it's me. So what did they do? Read how Egypt was conquered. They put Amr ibn al-As in this, and they fired him through the air, over the wall. Amr ibn al-As lands, safe, doesn't break no bones, fights his way, opens the door, the army enters. That's how they conquer Fustat. Majanina, madmen. But it's attachment to the words of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. People who were not necessarily interested in the content, they were interested in the speaker. That so long as he said it sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the content had to be true. You see, they never measured it the other way.